Welcome to this short video where we explain the difference between margin and padding in CSS and HTML5. So sometimes it can be confusing, especially for beginners, to know when to use margin and when to use padding as you create your styles. So the simplest explanation or difference between these two is that the margin is used to create space between an element and its surrounding neighbors. So let's say you have placed your element in an HTML document, but you feel like the element is too close to its neighbors. You can use the margin to create space between that element and its neighbors. Normally, these are siblings, so it can be any surrounding elements. So, in order to push away other elements, the margin can be used. Then we also have padding, which is slightly different in that, let's say you create a container or a parent element and you place some content or some children within that parent container, and you feel like the parent is too close to the children. There is no space, there is no room between the parent and the children. You can use padding to create the distance between an element and its children. So the container can uh, be a bit spaced out from its contents using the padding. So the simple difference is margin pushes away neighbors, whereas padding, it pushes away the parent or it creates space between the parent and its children. So we are going to demonstrate um, the effects of these two styles when we're using CSS. So I'll switch over to my IDE, then we'll try to work something out. Um, so maybe this is just a boilerplate, but let me just put um, a title, margin versus padding. So I'll create a div element. Okay. Um, then inside it, I'll create a span element. Okay. So within the span element, we'll just put hello. Then outside of the div element, we can have another div element. So this is the first neighbor. This is the second neighbor. So we have just laid out some content. So let's run it and let's see what it looks like. Okay, this is what we have. We have a neighbor, then we have our target element, then we have another neighbor. I'll be creating CSS within the web document for the sake of simplicity, but I do not recommend you to include your styles within your HTML document. So I'll give the second div a class name. And the reason why we are doing that is because we want to be able to single it out in our CSS code. So we can give it a class. Maybe this is our target div. So let's just call it target div. And in order to reference it from CSS, we put a period, then target div. So what that means is any element with a class which is called target div um, is the one for which the following rules apply. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to add margin. Or maybe before we do that, let's put a border around um, that div. So a 1 pixel border, which is solid, which is a dark color. So let's see what happens. Okay, I think that works. Now, we also want a border on the span that is within the target div. So we'll also say target div span. So this comma that we put here, it separates the two. Um, so we are targeting an element which has a class which is target div. That's the first thing. Then also we are targeting an element which is a span and it is within the target div class. So this will cause both the div um, and the span inside it to get a border of 1 pixel. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, as you can see, there is a border there. So now we want to introduce a margin. So we want to push away the elements that are surrounding our target div. So in order for us to do that, we just say target div, then we say margin. Then let's use this measurement. So you see that we have created a space between the div and its surrounding elements. So what we could also do, let's say we just wanted to push the target element. We wanted to push the element above it. So what we'll just do is would specify margin top, then would put a measurement. This way it will just push against the element at, at the top, but it ignores the element at the bottom. So if we also want to push the element at the bottom, sorry, we could do something like this. Okay, so this works perfectly well. Then we also want to investigate the effects of the padding style. So maybe for this one, let's just put 4am. So when we are dealing with a margin, maybe if you noticed, we had the margin for the top, margin bottom. We can also have margin right, and we can also have margin left. So all these they will. So if you notice, maybe let's remove the margin. Let let me remove them so that you see what it looks like. As you can see, the target div is occupying the full length of the page or of the browser. But if we put margin left, it will now create spacing on the left side by a certain measurement. Then it will still occupy the full length from the beginning of the tag. So it will run all the way to the borders of the browser. So there is no space at the right side of the view area. So let's say we also wanted to create a space on the right. We could do something like this, margin right 10em. So if we refresh, you notice that there is a space on the left hand, on the side, top and bottom. So that's how easily somebody can push against elements. But there is a shorthand way of writing it. So let's say I would just say margin, then I would put a measurement. This would apply for all four sides. So as you can see, nothing is changing. So maybe let me just reduce the size. So nothing changes. Well, if you just say margin, but you don't say whether it's the top or the bottom margin that you want to effect changes to, it'll just apply that margin to all the four sides. But sometimes, it can be tedious. Let's say you wanted to apply different measurements of margin for all the four sides. It'll be difficult to say margin top this, then margin bottom that, then left, then right, it would be well, yeah, it works, but it would be a lot of work. CSS allows you um, to specify uh, different measurements of margin that you may want to effect to the same element. So let's say you want a different um, X measurement of margin than the Y measurement of the margin. Like, for example, let's say horizontally, you want the margin to be double what it is vertically. So let's say on one side we had 6, would put 12 on the other side. So what this means is that vertically we have a margin of 6 em, both at the top and at the bottom. Okay, so that's a sum total of 12 padding for the y-axis. Then we have 12 for the left and 12 for the right. That is for the horizontal axis. So how CSS deciphers these measurements. So let's say we put just one measurement like this. What it means is we have 6 em for all the 4 sides. But if we put two measurements like this, it means um, the first one is for the y-axis, so it goes vertically, and the second one is for the x-axis. So normally what I want to do, I want to experiment because I have to be sure which one is for the x-axis, which one is for the y-axis. So I'll put the other one to be too low and the other one to be too much. So that way we can know which one affects the x-axis and which one affects the y-axis. So uh, what I expect is that 2 will be applied to the y-axis and 22 will be applied to the x-axis. So let's see how it will appear. Okay, just as I expected. It is more sideways than it is vertically. So let's say we also put 22 on the first parameter and 2 on the second. You see that vertically, that's when it's too much. So the first parameter is used to control the y-axis and the second one is used to control the x-axis. Okay, but let's say you want to put the margin for all 4 sides, but you want different measurements for each side. You could use margin top, margin bottom, margin left, margin right, which is a lot of work, like I said before. But what you can do is you can specify all 4 coordinates. You can specify a measurement for all the 4 sides, sorry. So if you do something like this and we run it, you'll see that there's a different measurement. Like if you look horizontally, you see on the right there is a smaller gap than we have on the left. Then on the top, again, we have a smaller gap than we have at the bottom. So the margin on the left is much more than what we have on the right. Then the margin on the bottom is much more than what we have on the top. So just for us to see which element is which, we can just put a ridiculously large value just for us to know which value affects what area. So the first one should affect the top, then the second one should affect the right, then the bottom one, the third one affects the bottom, then the last one affects the left. So from top, it goes clockwise to the left. So for this one, let's put 20 and let's see what happens. As you can see, the top margin is the one that was affected. What about if we put 40? I expect the right margin to be affected. Okay, as expected. Then the bottom margin to be affected. As you can see, you now need to scroll in order to get to the other neighbor. It's because it was pushed way down by the bottom margin. Then leftwise, if we put 80, everything has been pushed towards the right. So these are different ways in which you can express the margin. So I think on margin we we are okay. Okay. Then now we want to explore. Um, we want to find out how the padding affects elements. So we are going to also use the target div. So we want to see what happens to the padding, what happens when we change the padding of the target div. So let's just make sure, maybe let me reduce the margin so that it becomes something reasonable. Let me leave it at this measurement. So remember also that we have a border for the target div. Then we have a border for the span element, which is inside the target div. So if we create a space between the target div and the span, we must see uh, the bordered element within the target div uh, moving away from the target div. That's what we expect to see. So within the same target div, let's just try to put a padding of 2 em. I hope I'll be able to remember to explain why we are using em measurements and why are we not using pixels. Okay. If you notice, we put a padding of 2 em, and as a result, the span element has moved away from the borders of its parent, which is the target div. Okay. So let's say we just wanted to move sideways. Maybe we could move the left padding only and everything else remains the same. If we did this, our element would move towards the right. Then maybe let's say we just wanted to change the top padding. Um, this is what we should expect. Then the bottom. Okay. And also the rules um, that we saw applying for margin, they also apply when you are expressing your padding. What I mean by that is if you put one measurement, it applies to all four sides. But if you put two measurements, it the first one should apply to the y-axis and the second one to the x-axis. Okay, so we have more sideways than we have vertically. It's because we put 8 for the padding horizontally. Okay, but we can put all four measurements. And what I expect is the top padding should be less, then the right padding should be it should be large. Then we have a bigger bottom padding, then the left padding should be the most. So okay, this is as we expected. The left padding is the one which we have on the so this is the order in which the values are placed for margin and for padding. So I hope you have an understanding on how margin and padding works. So let's say we wanted to also space the text yellow and the border um, in the span element. Let's just say we wanted to create a space, we'll just put padding as well. Because the border belongs to the span element, then the text is the content or is the child of the span element. So if we put padding, it means we are going to separate the span element, or maybe we are going to create a space between the span element and the text that is inside it. So the padding should create a space between hello and the span and its border. Okay, that looks much better. Um, then let's say we just want things to look a bit better. We could just put a border radius. Um, put it is 0.5 pm. Looks much nice. Okay, so I think that's it about margin and padding.